So here with me is Oana. Do I pronounce it correctly? I'm still struggling with the Romanian names. Oana Florescu, who is the software engineer leader at YouTube. She and I will be talking about the fast-growing cross-functional teams and scaling tech products in a startup and a startup-like environment. And I think before we start with the first question, because you're going to explain to me what is a startup-like environment, I'm very happy that you're here with us because you actually came from Zurich, from the Google campus. Although you have Romanian background, you're not living here. So you have a very broad experience in leading global teams and scaling up different tech products at Google. We will discuss how these cross-functional teams in the startup-like environments are actually working. How do you identify scaling opportunities? How do you manage that in the team? And how important is building an inclusive culture and a team that has a shared value system? How to scale successfully, but also sustainably, with employees' well-being in sight. I would like also to share a bit about your biography so far, because YouTube is already impressive, but you actually had some very interesting roles before that. You were in Geo and Google Calendar before. You also are bringing a PhD in embedded systems from the Eindhoven University of Technology and a computer science engineering degree from the Polytechnic University here in Bucharest. You're passionate about diversity and inclusion, demonstrated through an active role in fostering women in tech. I would like to know also about this part. In Switzerland, and you're also a mentor of women in tech. During your outstanding professional experience, you've been in the forefront of building multidisciplinary teams united by a common mission and work ethics. Welcome. So before we start, tell me, what is a startup-like environment? So we're going to speak about startup culture, but you're actually working in a corporate, let's be honest.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I also wanted to say I'm very excited to be here at Techsylvania and in Cluj. It's true, I work at Google, which is a big company, and I've actually never worked at a startup. But maybe a little bit about how teams operate at Google that I think will hopefully help set the context. Typically, teams at Google operate rather independently, and they have a lot of autonomy. So they are setting their priorities, they decide how they organize themselves and set goals. Of course, as long as they are aligned with the bigger priority of the larger organization where they operate. So obviously, the goals that they set for themselves or how they prioritize the work is being reviewed with the leadership of the respective org. But as long as there's alignment, the teams are pretty independent. And as you were mentioning in my intro, I've actually had the opportunity through my tenure at Google to be in a couple of setups where I build and scale teams or building products or feature sets from the ground up. So from some of the learnings and some of the experiences I had, I sense that probably some of these might be applicable to a startup environment. That's why I called it startup-like environment, like recognizing that even if you're scaling or starting something from the ground up in a bigger company, there's a little bit of cushioning that you have, like some comfort, like running in that space. But there's a lot of principles, a lot of how do you think about growing the team, how you think about scaling the product that you can learn and leverage from what other teams around you do or you develop on your own. But there's probably very similar to what a smaller company maybe has to deal with. So
I think there might be comparisons that we can do. By the way, what are you working on at this point, or what is your team working on how do you call it, like in YouTube or in YouTube? Yeah.
So I lead a team that is focusing on building shoppable videos, so bringing shoppability features to videos on YouTube and help creators on YouTube to engage in new ways with their audiences and grow revenue as well from selling their channel branded merchandise, for example, on their channels and their videos.
So I saw in your biography you actually have still a very spectacular career, although you haven't worked in a startup. I think this is somewhere probably in your career in the future, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut now. So you've been bringing the top leadership in building across functional teams at multinational corporations, starting from the very bottom line. So why is having a common mission and vision, let's make a differentiation between the two, because I think people kind of, sometimes exchange them in the wrong way, as well as shared values between the team members, so important in cross-functional teams. So why are they so important?
So to me, vision is really about everything that drives the work. So I'm encompassing in vision the core values, the purpose of the organization, the mission, so what is the overarching goal, and then also the strategy, how to go about that goal. So it's a bit of a sum of all of this.
Okay, so that's the big term.
Exactly, yeah. So core values plus purpose plus mission plus strategy equals vision.
Okay.
Or that's kind of the framework
formula
I've been using. And I believe, and from everything I've seen, experienced, and read, really key to bringing people together is inspiration. So having a worthy purpose for your team, for your organization, for your startup, you're starting from the ground up, having a motivating overarching goal, like something that you work towards that is inspiring for people, as well as a set of core values that helps team members build trust, build psychological safety, that encourages innovation and taking risks and bringing ideas forward. It's almost like, it's really literally feels like it's bringing people together, gives them motivation. It feels like everybody has a role to play. It doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy or role you play. You have a part towards achieving that bigger goal. And it's really like aligning everybody and inspiring everybody towards making progress towards that vision. And in my experience, like cross-functional teams by nature, there's different skill set people bring. If you think of like taking different perspectives, there's also around, different backgrounds and different skill set, not only that is product or engineering or user experience, there's like more to the mix, right? And I think the thing that inspires people and that motivates is what brings them together and fosters creativity and innovation and gelling teams and organizations together towards the bigger goal.
Can we speak also from a practical perspective? So I think in the beginning, when you're a team of 3 people, like 3 co-founders in most of the cases, it's very clear, like, maybe what is the mission, like what is the vision. You also know your core values. But then again, when you start scaling at some point, how big is your team at YouTube? Growing, okay. I think at some point when you reach something around 10, 15, it actually gets really hard to communicate that to everyone. I myself, I'm a co-founder, and I'm sometimes worried that I don't have enough personal contact to everyone who is now on the team. And it's, of course, also hard for me to communicate that vision that was so clear in the beginning. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very good point, because indeed that's my sense as well. And when my team was small, and I'm assuming in a small startup with a couple of people, everybody knows everybody. You kind of discuss every day, several times a day. It's like more of a shared ground, so the mission is clear, like strategy, even if there are changes to the direction you're taking, it's a lot more kind of coming together organically and with everybody on the same page all the time. The bigger the size of the team or of the organization, then it becomes indeed a challenge of like how you scale changes probably to the strategy, assuming the mission is the one that is more stable and the purpose is probably the most stable one, like why we exist, right? Okay. But like strategy may change. The strategy is about how you go about achieving your goal and achieving your mission. That could change, right? Depending on what you learn or guidance from investors or like learning from the users, right? So how do you decide it? How you communicate it? Exactly, that's your question. I think that in my experience, in my observations, the bigger the organization, I think the more clearly the responsibility falls on the leadership to set that direction and then to communicate it and propagate it through the organization. Really taking into account, so making sure there are forums so that people can express their opinions, because you can't see everybody every day. So how do you take in that feedback so that people still feel empowered to take part and play their role in how they're setting the direction? And also, I think another important element that I feel it's irrespective of the size is everything you do, almost every decision that you're making, how do you keep anchoring it into, so what are we here for? What are we trying to achieve? How we said we're going to achieve this, right? So, for example, an example I do with my organization, like in some forums, like all hands like type of things, I usually tend to come back to, so here's the overarching goal that we have, just to anchor any conversation we have or a decision we're making or a strategy update that we might have. Also, when we are in a decision-making forum type of conversation, like making sure that we're not straying away and focusing too much on what we're trying to decide about, but like, okay, is that helping us achieve the bigger goal that we set for ourselves? Is it getting us closer to it, further away? Like so anchoring all the time in, obviously as appropriate, in the appropriate forums where people can hear it from you as the leader with every opportunity.
How often do you think a leader should ask themselves exactly that question? And like, the things that we're doing now and the way that we're doing them, are they still moving us closer towards that vision that I had and solving the problem that I actually wanted to solve in the first place? How often should we ask ourselves that?
So in how we're organize ourselves, like at Google, like I would say at least at the quarterly boundaries when we actually set the objectives for the next quarter, because like you do some sort of planning, and I don't know, I assume that in other companies is also some granularity of at least a couple of months. You maybe don't plan from a week to another, but probably you take some time horizon. You may not need to make every day you need to question necessarily yourself if you're still on the strategy, but you need to have at least from time to time when you are setting some big milestones or some big goals that you're trying to achieve, maybe that's a good moment to come back and say, okay, are we still on a path? If we do this, if we're successful at this, how do we measure, first of all, if we would be successful at X? And being successful at X, does it help us get closer to our goal?
Do you still Do you still use the OKR?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Quarterly objectives and key results. Yes.
Exactly. Okay. So let's speak a bit more about culture, because I think it's there is this famous quote by Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I guess the culture that you're going to establish in your team is actually having a very strong effect. So what are the indicators for a strong and inclusive culture at work? And what is their correlation to, let's say, the growth of the company?
For that, I would say I would still come back to what are the core values that are the principles and the deep beliefs that a company, small startup, team, larger team, organization has. Ultimately, a culture where the values are helping people feel empowered. It gives them information and makes them empowered to make decisions, or at least give feedback and make suggestions, come up with ideas, take risks, without the fear of being punished if something goes wrong, encouraging learning, encouraging risk-taking and learning. I think they go hand in hand. It can actually really empower people to innovate, come up with ideas, like develop this sense of purpose, accountability. Actually, was mentioned in a talk earlier this morning. It is. I also believe that culture and core values are the daily bread, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I think.
Yes.
And it is about, in a way, an investment in the long term, let's say, in the people and fostering this psychological safety between the team members, like employees of the startup or at the company. I feel like a team that is empowered, a team that is able to take risks, a team that is empowered to learn and develop and bring ideas, in long term will help the company grow. I think it's hard to say, oh, it's going to take 3 months or 3 years. So I don't think it's about the numbers. It's really about the spirit and what that is fostering. And that can attract talent that also kind of pertains to that, similar culture, and taking in different perspectives and being more open to new ideas and being inclusive, right, at the end of the day.
I remember some months ago, or actually years, I was listening to this keynote by a former pilot at Lufthansa. And because they foster this kind of culture where they do not really punish mistakes, but they actually, open discussion about it, because it's very critical, to know what went wrong. He said at some point that a lot of the crashes are happening because of human nature and ego, and it's very easy to have an ego as a pilot. So he threw a term which I really liked, and it was, I'm sorry. No. Confident humility. So it was coming from a place where you're a human being, so you're prone to make mistakes. You are definitely going to make mistakes. But this doesn't mean that you're incompetent. You can still be confident in the way that you're operating, the things that you know, the skill set that you have, although you might have mistakes. And I think when we start getting to that point, it's much easier to speak about failures and mistakes so that we can learn from that. Something that we unfortunately don't really have here in Southeast Europe and in Romania. We're very much afraid to be honest about our mistakes.
So at Google, we have, this might probably be known, we have this concept of doing postmortems. Usually that's post a production incident.
Oh, please.
And this
share.
really comes from something bad happened. Nobody had the intention, obviously. Somebody was mentioning earlier, bugs are inherent, like there will be something somewhere. So probably at some point, there might be a bigger bug that got unnoticed through any testing, that has happened. And the idea of postmortem is the person who owns it, that identified it, kind of like investigated it, got to the bottom of the problem, maybe even like themselves maybe fix a problem, rolled the fix into production, or rallied other teams, depending on where the problem was in production, which server didn't work well. And the idea is really a document that is written down on what happened, what was the root cause, what was the impact, what went well, because there's probably some stuff that went well, and what didn't go so well, and what can we learn from it, and what do we put in place so this doesn't repeat. And it's the same idea, like you own it as a team in general. Some mistake has happened. We didn't know about it because it definitely wasn't intentional. How can we prevent it in the future? And that's about learning at the end of the day. So the whole focus of this, and then the whole team usually reads through that and discuss it and learns from it. Because the whole idea is we can't be perfect. No one is, and none of us knows everything. But with every mistake we make, we learn from it, we become better.
And how do you stop the blaming, cycle? It's your fault.
We don't blame. That's actually part about the don't blame. The whole point is the postmortem is not about blame. It's about we learn as individuals and as teams. Mm-hmm. And it's really seen in that way, in the way we review it or the way we discuss about it is we're not, hey, you did this, and how come, it's never, occurring. It's more oh, interesting, so we shouldn't do that anymore, or in this case, we should, set this test in place, or this monitoring in the production server. So we literally do not, and I don't think I've heard anybody like, pointing fingers, but if somebody would, they would probably be called out like, hey, the point is not about the blame, it's about the, how do we learn and as teams.
So let's imagine it like this. So we got to the point where we are probably 15 at the company. We have defined our vision. We have defined our mission. We have pretty clear strategy of what we're going to do, but we are adaptable to it. We might change it. Isn't it now the time to think about the next leadership? And how do we build that? So tell me about the leadership bench and what is the best way to start investing in those employees who are then at some point going to take over the leadership positions that you're going to need?
Yeah, it's a very good question and a very important topic, especially when you start, small team or small startup. You invest in people, starting with the core values, starting with, I think there were some examples in previous talks, like some people doing pair programming, like how do you get people, from the ground up and they learn. Now, there is a point where, as you said, like you have a certain size and you have a strategy and you probably start having some ideas where the team might be or you hope to be in 12 months type of time frame. So you start taking some time frame in mind that is a little bit more into the future, and you start thinking a little bit about what kind of challenges you're probably going to have at that phase, like how large the team probably is going to be. Is it from 15 to 50? What kind of business or product challenges, because you probably are going to scale and it's going to be that many users your platform would have or your product, or maybe you go to another market and what kind of challenges you have. Maybe you need to start talking about scaling the tech. So what kind of challenges are probably going to be in the horizon of 12, maybe 18 months type of thing? And then you work with the people, obviously, that you already have so far, who are the ones that they can actually start taking on a little bit more responsibilities, assigning stretch opportunities. And stretch is intentional because the idea is not to drown them in the middle of a deep swimming pool with big challenges that they're not at all ready for, but find some opportunities where it's a little bit stretched from what they're doing now, but they can grow. So it's taking them a little bit outside the comfort zone, and then they're pushing them gently, bit by bit. So that's kind of how you think about, in my opinion, about growing leadership skills from the team you already have. But then you should probably also look the talent you have already, the interest people have, maybe some might want to take management, some might just want to stay deep technical. So there's a lot of factors you need to take in. So in your overview of what the next 12 months might be, you need to identify if there are still gaps that even if, with the stretch opportunities and this, folks will grow, other areas that wouldn't be covered. Maybe, let's make this up, maybe the team will get to 50 people, but nobody in your team has ever managed a 50 people team before. And maybe, there's some people who are interested in management, maybe you'll start them with 5, 10 people, some, number, but you probably start seeing if there's any areas where you need to hire, because it would become drowning opportunity, no stretch opportunity for someone in the current team. So, and the reason I was mentioning 12 to 18 months type of horizon, because from what I've noticed and what I've been reading, if you hire, anything shorter than, because it takes time to hire also, to find the right candidate, think of the profile, what kind of skills they're looking for, how you're going to interview them. It might take a few months, right? So if your time horizon is 6 months, not 12, you'd be hire someone who is just ready for that first phase, and then what do you do with the next 12? If you actually take a much longer time horizon, then maybe you start thinking, oh, the organization might be 200 people in 3 years' time. But you might be overhiring at that point. You will hire a manager for 200 people, and you're only going to have 50 in the next 12 months, and it's a little bit over hiring. I think that would be the term in that case. So that's how I feel given how long hiring would take, if you need to do hiring, the time horizon, and if it's in a executive or leadership role, the time horizon needs to be big enough so that it gives you the flex of, finding right candidate with the skill set that you'll need in that time interval.
What do you think, because it was mentioned already in the first talk here on the stage, what do you think of this approach, like hire slow, fire fast? Is it something that you also kind of do at Google? I actually remember this movie that I was watching about these interns who were, being tested for their Googleness. Did you have this as well?
So we do have the internship program, yes. Usually internship is several months. It's a several months contract, it's not a full-time hire, so we don't actually look at that as in like hiring so that they can get fired, like, we would want, people to, hopefully get excited about Google ideally, but by tech in general, so maybe they continue to stay in the tech industry, they develop some skill set from an internship of several months at Google. So it's I think we view this as a long-term investment in the tech community in general and growing the skill set through the internship program. Yeah, I'm a little bit torn about the hire fast part, mostly because
hire slow.
Hire slow. I think I'm more comfortable with that, as in like what that means is not necessarily you have to take a long time, but like be careful with how you're thinking about what you're looking for in hiring, as in what are the skill set. Depends on like if you're hiring maybe more junior people straight out of school versus maybe, as we were talking earlier, someone in the leadership role, so what kind of skill set you're looking for. Then you would probably like think of other aspects. I think was mentioned in another talk, not necessarily just hire with a certain, university or a certain type of CV, like take a wider angle. So that also means hire slowly a bit, take a wider angle. Maybe there's some other backgrounds that people actually may have. I think someone was mentioning like architectural background, but then a very strong engineer. So like this, like open up the aperture, like there's more people that could be actually in the pipeline that you'd be reviewing, talking to, interviewing, that could be a good fit. So be more inclusive in the approach. So that's why it might be a little bit on the slower side. Now the fire fast, like I think that we should take time to invest in people. I strongly believe in that. So investing in people means, do they have the opportunity to learn? So assuming that there was alignment with the culture and the mission and people got in and they were also excited, so assuming that upon the hiring, right? Like, so we still keep the assumption they're motivated, so do they have the opportunity to learn? Did they have the right training? Did they get paired up with a more seasoned engineer to help them learn? So I would push the firing fast, like give people the chance to shine in their own way.
I think one of the main advantages for startups is actually, the speed. So they are, very agile, they scale fast, they enter new markets very fast, which is, the main advantage, especially towards corporates. Still, Google maintains this kind of startup-like culture. And I was wondering, so if it's not the size of the company, what is it crucial so that you are still agile, so that you can still, maintain this kind of speed of development and growth and scaling?
I think the key remains the autonomy that you trust your teams with. So setting then the tone at the larger organization. So Google mission, everything we do in Google is towards, even if you are in YouTube or in Calendar or in Geo, like the work we do aligns with that bigger mission that Google has around organizing information, making universally accessible. So YouTube does in its own way, like, opening up the platform for creators and connecting to viewers, to their audiences and viewers. And there is a learning opportunity, there's content that you have there, other products at Google have, other, features that they contribute towards the larger goal. And then if you think about it, like the whole organizational mission it has, like what's the mission of the various areas and various functions and the various products. And then as long as actually, and coming back to make sure that people are aware of the strategy you're taking, what you're heading towards, and what's the direction to get there, and then give team the autonomies and the trust to organize themselves. keep them accountable. Like obviously, like we have the the priorities that we set up for ourselves. We review it with leadership and make sure that they make sense in the bigger picture. But for the most part, have the teams being independent in their organization and execution.
And I can say as a CEO, this is a very challenging position, to learn to trust. Yeah, that's been always also a challenge for me. Oana, thank you so much for this talk. I think we can actually talk a lot more about those topics, but we'll have to continue that later on, maybe at one of the site events or during the coffee break. I'm going to now invite the next speaker and see you around. Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you. Please stick around for a while. Don't travel back right away to Zurich.